Hi, everyone, and welcome back. In this episode, we have another great guest. We have Nick Beadleston and we're going to discuss B Corps. Nick, welcome to our discussion. Welcome to the class.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Goldston.
So, just to get started, could you introduce yourself and talk about your organizations and the great things that you're doing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, hey, everybody. Like you said, my name's Nick Beadleston. I'm a founding partner over at Good Impacts. We're a relatively small but growing consulting firm up here in northern Michigan in the United States. And we work with a number of small and mid-sized businesses all across the country and in a few other places in Europe and Central America. And our work is really about meeting those small and mid-sized businesses where they're at along their impact journey. So helping them identify ways in which they can have a positive influence on the communities they serve, sell, and work in, positive influences across their entire supply chain, and for the environmental systems that we really rely on and they really rely on. So our work is really about helping these small and mid-sized businesses take that next step on their impact journey. What is it going to take to move them forward one incremental step at a time? Whether that's, like I said, identifying new ways to get involved or assessing and developing programs or projects that they can pursue over time to really hit some of those impact goals that they're looking at.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So, as I ask all the guests, uh, my first question is, what is your definition of sustainability? And second, what would be your top two SDGs?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question and not a simple one because there
That's
are
why I
there.
ask everybody.
It's good though. It definitely helps frame up someone's position on some of these much larger issues.
Mhm.
So many folks, when they talk about sustainability, what they actually mean is financial longevity. Can they, if they get into this business or if they pursue this model or strategy, can they continue to do it in the long run? And true sustainability in, say the commonly held UN definition, meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow, is really about understanding and accounting for all the negative externalities that your business creates. So what sorts of unintended rather consequences are we having, again, in the communities we serve, across the broader environment? What are those unintended negative consequences and how can we account for those within our business model? So maybe that's changing sourcing practices, maybe that's a reduction of certain materials in your processing or in your facilities. Or maybe at a certain point when you've done everything you can do internally, starting to look at external solutions and bringing in other partners, like a carbon offset program, allocating um, allocating profits toward programs in other places where those offset programs are really going to have a lot of bang for your buck. So I think so much of sustainability comes back to identifying externalities, accepting that, again, through potentially no fault of your organizations, you're responsible for negative impacts, and then coming up with ways to solve those.
Okay, excellent. And for the second question, what's your top two
Yeah,
SDGs?
this is totally a dodge, but it's I it really comes down to what the organizations we're working with prioritize.
Yeah.
There are 17 for a reason,
Hmm.
and they're not weighted. None of them are more important than the others, and none of them can happen independent of the others.
Right.
That's one of the reasons the Millennial Development Goals, while they were ambitious, they ultimately failed because there were a lot of challenges with that well-meaning effort, but there wasn't the interconnectivity that we see with the SDGs. And a lot of it's that 17th goal, the really unsexy number 17,
Mm-hmm.
that provides the framework for
Mm-hmm.
folks to collaborate on all of those other SDGs.
Right.
So yeah, I think my favorite is number 17 and my second favorite is number 17.
Right. So and that's an amazing point where all of those SDGs are interconnected, and one thing that I think is important for you to fully understand those SDGs and the importance of each one, you need to delve deeper into this systems thinking and the systems theory, and that all of them are interconnected. Now, now you made about three different points there, but I want to touch on the last one, which I think is the most impactful, is how do we get to that 17th goal?
Yeah, one of the great advancements over the MGDs that we see in the SDGs is, um, I think I screwed up my acronyms there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I got it.
Is the fact that these really audacious goals are broken down into these subcomponents and milestones within those.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of accomplishing, number 17 or 1 through 16, it really is about including as many diverse stakeholder groups as possible. And that was another challenge with the Millennium Goals. It was a lot of well-meaning European countries predominantly that decided they were going to solve the rest of the world's problems. And so little effort was put into, honest stakeholder engagement and understanding at a very ground level what some of the cultural and intercultural factors were that were going to either enhance or inhibit the work that was trying to be done. And certainly not taking into account all of the knowledge that already existed on the ground. It was a lot of this work is attempting to provide technical solutions to problems that have a technical aspect, but also have, a really systemic series of challenges behind them. So
Mm-hmm.
a technical challenge is insufficient alone to solve a systemic problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's excellent. And I think I was listening to one individual, which we're also gonna have on here, where I think he says that we are setting ourselves up for more additional complexity when we're trying to fix something that's already broken.
Mm.
Right. Now to that point, I think that there is a lot of work to do before we get to the 2030 goals. But I think that you made a point in that there's no waiting on all of these SDGs. And my approach is that, and the reason why I asked that question to everyone is that everyone has different priorities. So if you focus on your priorities, if you focus on 17 and I focus on my two, you focus on their two, they focus on their two, they focus on their two, then it's my opinion that all of those SDGs will be addressed and will have a probability for us to reach those goals. Now I've had one of my peers to disagree with me, but that's my opinion, and that's why we're having these discussions, to get insights and to get thoughts on everyone's ideas and opinions. I've been talking too much. So next question
Well,
is
before we move on, I will say that some of the financial empowerment and financial literacy, I always forget which particular goal that is, but that also underpins a lot of them.
Mhm.
Creating economic capability in communities
Mhm.
really is the solution to helping solve clean water challenges, is the solution to solving, local literacy challenges.
Right.
It really is small business development and micro loan and microcredit development paired with financial literacy. And when that happens, then, folks don't need outsiders flying in to build a school or dig a well.
Right.
Oftentimes, it's not even a technical knowledge, it's just lacking sufficient capital to be able to go ahead and do it. And outside technical expertise may not even be appropriate for the communities they're trying to serve. But
Right.
microloan work and financial literacy, yeah, that's at the root of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And because your focus is on those small and medium businesses, I absolutely commend you on that effort. And so for those who are unaware of the term, what is exactly what are you talking about when you talk about this term B Corps? What does that mean?
Yeah. So the B Corp certification is a certification,
Hmm.
and it's monitored, administered by a U.S. based nonprofit. Well, originated in the U.S. They've got offices all over now, but called B Labs. And so this certification is not dissimilar from some other certifications that folks might be familiar with, like organic or like fair trade, or a number of material compliance standards, but or compliance certifications, Rainforest Alliance and things like that. But the B Corp certification is a much more encompassing and holistic certification for all of both those negative and positive externalities that we talked about, the unintended or intended good or bad consequences happening both within and outside of the company. And so at the root of that certification is about 150 question assessment. And then how a company does on that assessment gives them an overall score. And so in order to become a certified B Corp, they need to have a minimum of 80 points on this score, which I believe goes up to, at least so far, a very theoretical 200.
Hmm.
But most conventional businesses, if they took the assessment, they'd come in at around, between 50 and 56 points. The minimum standard for being certified as a benefit corporation, a business which really focuses on public good and takes these things into account, that minimum score is 80.
Hmm.
And so a lot of companies fall in between that 80 and 100, and there are some really exemplary companies. Ones people are familiar with: Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, Kickstarter's another B Corp. They're 100 plus, but and I think it's also really important to understand the difference between B Corp certification and benefit corporations. They're closely connected, but they are separate. B
Hmm.
Corps, like I said, they're a certification. You go through a process, you go through a recert every few years. Becoming a benefit corporation, which is available in not all 50 states, I think upper 30s. But anyway, that is a structure under which a structure of which you can form your company. So not unlike an LLC or an S corp, you can be a benefit corporation,
Hmm.
either right when you're formed, or you can amend your corporate structure and bylaws and become a benefit corporation.
Hmm.
But this essentially, and the laws vary state to state, but essentially it says that your organization will also account for public benefit within your organization. So
Hmm.
essentially, it gives management legal cover to pursue activities that may not necessarily maximize the profits of the corporation, but
Hmm.
instead have a general benefit for the community, the environment, the supply chain. So
Interesting.
yeah, those two terms are often used interchangeably. And like I said, they're closely linked, but they're not quite the same thing.
Okay. So when I look at that B Corp certification,
Mhm.
is there any validation to the applicants, if you will, answers, within that application when applying for that certification?
Yeah. So once you go through the application and
Hmm.
submit supporting documents, and
Okay.
this assumes that you want to go for the full certification. There are, I think I might have mentioned, but about 3,700 B Corps all around the world.
Hmm.
But 50,000 companies have used the assessment tool, which is a free tool available to any business. So it is an important side note that many more organizations use those tools than actually, at least so far, have pursued the certification.
Right.
But anyway, you do the assessment, you upload your documents. There is a review process with B Labs, with the nonprofit that manages the whole thing.
Hmm.
And so, depending on the size of the organization and the industry, it may take a few months of back and forth, all the way to a year to become fully certified. Um, and a lot of that is around confusion at an organizational level about what some of these things mean.
Hmm.
What does it mean to have an open and transparent purchasing policy? How do we get it to the standard of this certifying organization?
Hmm.
Um, we do a diversity seminar once a year. Is that not enough to get our points for equity and inclusion? Well, no, actually there's a lot more to it than that.
Right. Right.
So that that back and forth really depends on the company. But yeah, B Lab does a good job working with organizations. It's not a really binary thing. Either you make it or you don't, and you already
Hmm.
paid us, so good luck. They want organizations to be successful, and that unfortunately is
Interesting.
not always the case with all certifications.
Right. Yeah, I like that. And you said there's 3,700 globally, 2,000 in the US. So yeah, so there are a number in the UK. Um, and so yeah, this thing is global, and I only foresee it getting larger, especially with 50,000 taking the assessment. So the next question I have is, what prompted you to start your organization?
So a lot of my expertise in supply chain development um, really comes from the specialty coffee industry. I was working with a nonprofit that focused on coffee community development initiatives. And so they were created and funded by a number of small and mid-sized coffee companies. Some of them, I believe, have nationwide distribution, but really, really regional companies. Definitely not on that Starbucks level. Um, but they were doing and are doing incredible work. And like many food and beverage industries, the margin for coffee roasters is incredibly small. It's a $50 billion a year industry globally. But so much of of the profit in that industry is sort of lost in the middle in
Mhm.
transition. So when it comes to the cafes that consumers are used to seeing or the coffee roasters that they're used to buying from, the profit margins are so slim.
Mhm.
Um, but here was a group of companies that had banded together to use their really minimal resources to do what they felt was morally and ethically the correct thing. They felt like it was their obligation to support the producers that they were purchasing from in South and Central America, in Africa, in Asia. And so it really opened me up to the incalculable good that small and mid-sized businesses can do, particularly when they work together.
Mhm.
And it really negated this argument that a lot of folks will make. We'd love to get involved in those issues, but we just don't have the money.
Mhm.
and this nonprofit and this group of companies, they didn't start by digging 50,000 wells. They started at a very small level with a few communities that they could work with and continue to grow. So not only did it help me understand what business as a force for good could do, but it also helped me understand how that incremental growth, it's not the sexy global goals that major conglomerates can set. It's not that on day one, but it can certainly grow into something that touches many communities and really strengthens and enriches that entire supply chain.
Mhm. Okay.
And looking at the work at a much more local, at a community level, for example, across the US, there are so many nonprofits doing phenomenal work on social determinants of health, on poverty alleviation, on, conservation, you name it.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, the nonprofit model, it's the best we've come up with so far to address those issues, but it's fundamentally flawed in that it's solving problems at a deficit. So
Mhm.
anyone who's ever worked with, served on the board of, been involved with a nonprofit knows that they're constantly, to use an American colloquialism, constantly behind the eight ball.
Mhm.
They're constantly operating at a deficit. The more services they provide, the deeper into that deficit they go. They have to fundraise to make up for that gap. So the nonprofit industry and individual nonprofits, with some notable exceptions, are, they're stressful places to work. They squeeze good people, and really ask a lot of them. The burnout rate is high, not because the organizations are bad, just because the
Right.
model is imperfect. So looking at the for-profit world that, theoretically is made up of entities that have solved the profit problem,
Mhm.
otherwise they wouldn't be in
Right.
business.
Right.
They're better positioned to address some of these, really complex social and environmental problems. The difference is the norm has been that they don't focus on those.
Mhm.
And we're seeing that change. It's been a slow and long time coming change, but market signals and consumer pressure and rising leadership of a younger age and different value set is really driving those ethos forward in businesses.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what I'm passionate about seeing. We have enough good nonprofits. We need more good businesses.
Right. Yeah. All right. Excellent. So, how do you see what you're doing with a working with mission driven organizations? How do you see your experience being transferred to an entrepreneur within the fashion industry, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hate when other people give these answers. It really depends on, on the
It
entrepreneur and the
depends.
organization. Yeah, in my experience, the folks that we work with, they really, the organizations that we work with, they fit into one of two categories. Either they are a really mission driven, really purpose focused entrepreneur
Mhm.
and startup. And in that case, they got the positive impacts on lock. They know what good they want to do in the world. Where they're most likely struggling is with basic business skills.
Mhm.
They need to, well, and access to capital. I mean, that's the biggest struggle for every startup. Even if they have, a model that works great at scale, that early access to capital is troublesome. And a lot of mission driven startups aren't really well versed in how to translate that mission driven language into impact that lending institutions or investors are going to be interested in.
Mhm.
So on the mission driven startup side, it's, basic business development skills and access to capital. And then on the other side, you've got businesses that are maybe, more established and they would fit sort of that moniker of a traditional business. they figured out the profit side. Maybe they're growing, maybe they're stable and where they want to be, but they are starting to, in response to, again, changes in leadership or market signals, they're realizing, okay, we got to do more than just provide X, Y, and Z widget. We also need to take a look at our practices and policies to see how we can be creating these positive impacts, because our consumers are going to begin to demand it. Our employees are definitely going to, begin to demand it. So for them, it really is more about understanding, conceptualizing, and executing around the positive impacts.
Mm-hmm.
So you've really got those two different groups of individuals and organizations. And what's fantastic is that ultimately they get to the same place,
Mm-hmm.
but the skills that they need along that journey and what they really have to to pack and unpack to be successful look a little different.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So the last question is a two-parter. So what advice would you give to an entrepreneur trying to, one, start up an organization? It's going to be a multiple parter, more than two. Sorry, a lot. So, and what would you do what steps would they take to become have this B Corp certified, right? And then also, what steps do they take to, like you said, just get started? Because you said many of these, like outside of the B Corp certification, if they just want to do good, right? If they want to be a mission-driven organization, where do they start?
Yeah, I think it's less about where do they start and more about when do they start. And it's right now, it's today. What is the
Yes.
minimum viable change you can create? And it doesn't have to be, in a community in Honduras where you source your materials from. It can be right in your own community where you already have roots and connections and a reputation. I think some of those far-flung positive impacts, are a little sexier, so folks like to focus on that, and that's a critical place for organizations of any size to grow to, is having great and transparent and equitable supply chains. But yeah, start local and start right now, and start small. This is,
Mm-hmm.
we lionize these multinationals with incredible, 2030 commitments and, carbon neutral by whenever. And that's important. We absolutely need that. And there are a litany of both supports and watchdog organizations for those multinationals. But it all has to start small.
Mm-hmm.
Unilever is doing incredible sustainability work, but they didn't just wake up one day and decide to do that.
Right.
It started with one of their, at the time, relatively small, and in terms of their $4 billion portfolio, Lipton tea makes up such a small percentage of that. And there was one executive within Lipton that took a look at their where they were sourcing their tea from, realized that not only was the tea very inorganic, but also the conditions under which it was being produced were, they were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So he got consent from his higher ups to start investing in community development and organic practices. That over time made the Lipton brand so much more competitive against, I always forget, I'm not a big tea guy, but PG Tips, I think, their other major competitor. So that sent a signal to the rest of Unilever, this company with like 500 subsidiaries, investing in this is really important and gives us a competitive edge. So, even though this experiment was a couple of $1 million, scaling it proportionally to the full Unilever, it was a really tiny experiment.
Right.
They started so small. And I think we let great be the enemy of good, which is why we're called Good Impacts. But I think it's really important to remember that small is simple and simple is scalable, and scalable is huge.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about starting with the smallest experiment that you possibly can, and then learning from that. I really advise clients, especially when they're early on, not to talk about it in terms of a new project or a new program, but to talk about it, especially when they're getting permission or the resources that they need, as an experiment. You know, an experiment can't fail. You can only gain knowledge from an experiment. So when you frame it that way, that gives folks within an organization the license that they need to, you know, to start, to make that smallest viable change, and then to learn from that and grow and eventually spread it across the organization. And not just whatever project or program, but the entire mentality that's behind doing that work. And so that was part of an answer to your question. The other part of it, you know, if you are a solopreneur or, you know, a really small startup, is to think about these kind of things now. I think lots of organizations, because there are so many challenges at the beginning, you know, you're trying to figure out how to make payroll and make it to the next, you know, next month, the next week for some startups. But the more you grow and the more complex your organization becomes, the harder it is to go through this work.
There you go. Bingo.
And so many big organizations that are now pivoting to this, they don't understand their positive impacts, their sustainability, whatever they want to call it. It's bolted on, it's not built in. You know, they look at it as a nice feature of an organization that does all these other things, rather than how can we internalize, again, this mentality throughout our organization? How can we include all of our employees? How can we really get the most benefit from what we're investing in, the positive impacts we're creating? So if it's you and, you know, 2 other founders, it's way easier to start building that in now than trying to bolt it on later, which frankly, you're probably not gonna, you know, once you're off and growing it.
Right. I completely agree with you. And that was an amazing response. So thank you for your time today, Nick. Where can people find you?
Yeah, best place to find me. Definitely feel free to reach out, Nick at goodimpacts.com. You can also go to goodimpacts.com, learn a little bit more about what we offer and how we work with small and mid-sized businesses all over the place.
That's what it's all about. Once again, thank you for your time. And we're going to do this again.
Having a technological failure here. I was so excited.
Right?
That'd be great.
Because it was a great conversation, because we made a great impact on these listeners. There you go. See you, everybody. See you.